The massive space station known as the Galactic Hub spun slowly against the backdrop of glittering stars. Tom pressed his nose against the transport ship's window, his blue eyes wide with wonder as he took in the incredible sight. The hub looked like a giant silver flower in space, with long petals stretching out from its center. Hundreds of spaceships moved around it like busy bees, carrying people from thousands of different worlds. "Tom, come sit down properly. We're about to dock," his mother called from her seat. She worked as Earth's chief diplomat to the Galactic Federation, which meant Tom had to move to this strange new place. He didn't mind, though. Everything here was exciting and new. The transport ship glided smoothly into one of the hub's docking bays. Tom watched as strange creatures of all shapes and sizes walked past their ship's windows. Some had blue skin, others had 4 arms, and a few even floated in the air instead of walking. Even after 6 months of living among aliens, Tom still found them fascinating. As they stepped off the ship, Tom's father put a hand on his shoulder. "Remember, you start at the academy tomorrow. It's a great honor for a human to study there." His father worked as a science advisor, helping Earth learn about advanced alien technology. Tom nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. The academy was the most famous school in the galaxy, where the smartest beings from every world came to study. He wondered if he would fit in, being just a normal 12-year-old human boy. Their new home was in the Earth Embassy section of the hub. It looked a lot like their old apartment back on Earth, except the windows showed endless space instead of blue sky. That night, Tom could hardly sleep. He kept thinking about his first day at the academy. The next morning, a floating robot guide led Tom through the academy's massive halls. The walls were made of a strange, shimmering material that changed color as they walked past. Other students hurried by. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few were just clouds of floating light. Tom tried not to stare, but it was hard not to. "Your first class is Universal Mathematics," the robot announced, stopping at a door. "Please enter." The classroom was unlike anything Tom had seen before. Instead of desks, students sat in floating bubbles that adjusted to each species' unique body shape. The teacher, who looked like a tall praying mantis, welcomed Tom with a gentle wave of one of their 4 arms. "Ah, our new human student," the teacher said. Their voice came through Tom's universal translator, as warm and friendly. "Please, take any free study bubble." Tom chose one near the back of the room. As soon as he sat down, the bubble adjusted itself to form a comfortable chair. A holographic screen appeared in front of him, showing strange symbols that somehow made perfect sense to his mind, thanks to the translator. During lunch break, Tom decided to explore the academy. The robot guide had mentioned something about an old puzzle that no one could solve, and that sounded interesting. He followed the signs that led to what the aliens called the Chamber of the Eternal Puzzle. The hallway leading to the chamber was empty. Most students hurried past it, some even making signs to ward off bad luck. Tom found this strange. Why would everyone avoid such an interesting place? The chamber's entrance was a simple arch made of black stone that seemed to absorb light, a sign in multiple alien languages, and recently added Earth English. Read, "Warning. The eternal puzzle remains unsolved after 10,000 years. Approach with caution." Tom's curiosity got the better of him. He stepped through the arch and found himself in a large, circular room. In the center, floating above a pedestal, was something that made his jaw drop. The puzzle looked like a mix between a Rubik's Cube and a soap bubble. It shifted and changed colors, its surface rippling like water. Patterns of light danced across its surface, forming shapes that almost made sense before dissolving again. Strange sounds came from it, sometimes like music, other times like whispers in unknown languages. As Tom moved closer, he noticed something odd. While the puzzle kept changing, there was something familiar about the way it moved. It reminded him of the way his little cousin played with toys back on Earth, trying different things just to see what would happen. A deep voice startled him. Most students don't stay in here for more than a few minutes. Tom turned to see an old alien standing in the doorway. They looked a bit like an elephant, but with silver skin and gentle eyes that glowed softly. The name badge on their robe read Professor Gray. "Why not?" Tom asked. "It's beautiful." Professor Gray walked closer, their heavy feet making no sound on the metallic floor. "Because, young human, this puzzle has defeated the greatest minds in the galaxy. We've used our most advanced computers, our most brilliant mathematicians, and our most powerful technologies. Nothing has worked. It drives some students mad, trying to solve it." Tom looked back at the puzzle. "But has anyone just played with it?" Professor Gray's trunk twitched, their version of raising an eyebrow. "Played with it? Yeah, like, it seems like it wants to play. Look at how it moves. It's like when you show a baby something shiny. It's trying to get attention." The professor was quiet for a long moment. Then they made a sound that Tom's translator interpreted as a thoughtful hum. "In 10,000 years, I don't think anyone has ever described it quite like that." Tom stepped closer to the puzzle. The lights seemed to dance more quickly, and the whispers grew louder. Instead of trying to understand the patterns, he simply watched them the way he would watch clouds making shapes in Earth's sky. "I think," he said slowly, "it's lonely." Professor Gray moved to stand beside him. "Lonely? The most complex artifact ever discovered in the galaxy, and you think it's lonely?" Tom nodded. "Everything else in the academy is being studied or used or talked to. But everyone's afraid of the puzzle. Maybe it just wants someone to spend time with it." The professor made a sound that the translator didn't quite catch. When Tom looked up, he saw that all four of Professor Gray's eyes were focused intently on him. "Young human," they said finally, "would you like to learn more about the puzzle's history?" Tom smiled. "Yes, please. Then come back tomorrow after your classes. Perhaps we've all been approaching this the wrong way for a very long time." As Tom left the chamber that day, he could have sworn he heard the puzzle's whispers change tone, almost as if it was saying goodbye. He knew that most students at the academy would think he was silly, thinking of the galaxy's greatest mystery as something that just wanted to play. But as he walked back to his family's apartment that evening, watching the stars through the hub's huge windows, Tom couldn't stop thinking about the puzzle. In his mind, he kept seeing those shifting patterns, hearing those mysterious whispers. They weren't scary or confusing. They were inviting, like a friend asking him to join their game. That night, as he lay in bed, Tom smiled to himself. Tomorrow, after his classes, he would go back to the puzzle chamber, but he wouldn't try to solve it like the others had. He would just spend time with it, watch it, maybe even talk to it. After all, sometimes the hardest problems don't need the smartest solution. Sometimes, they just need someone who isn't afraid to look at them differently. The next few weeks at the academy passed quickly for Tom. Every day after classes, he would visit the puzzle chamber, sometimes alone, sometimes with Professor Gray. While other students rushed to their advanced physics and quantum engineering classes, Tom spent hours watching the shifting patterns of the eternal puzzle. One afternoon, as Tom sat cross-legged on the chamber floor, he noticed something new. When he tilted his head to the left, some of the puzzle's patterns looked like the spiral seashells he used to collect on Earth's beaches. He smiled at the memory, and to his surprise, the puzzle's lights began spinning in similar spiral patterns. "Fascinating," Professor Gray said from their usual spot near the door. "The puzzle appears to be responding to your emotional state." Tom nodded, not taking his eyes off the swirling lights. "It's like it's trying to copy things that make me happy. Last week, when I thought about rain, it made patterns that looked like falling water." The professor's trunk swayed thoughtfully. "The greatest scientists in the galaxy have tried to understand this artifact's behavior patterns for millennia. They've used quantum computers, advanced AI systems, and mathematical models so complex they take years to calculate. Yet here you are, simply watching it." A group of older students passed by the chamber's entrance. One of them, a tall being with crystalline skin, made a dismissive sound. "Look at the primitive human, wasting time staring at lights, as if a child could understand what our best minds cannot." Tom heard them, but he didn't look away from the puzzle. He'd gotten used to such comments. Many of the alien students couldn't understand why he was allowed to study at the academy at all, since humans were one of the galaxy's youngest spacefaring species. "Tom," Professor Gray said softly, "would you like to know something interesting? In all my years studying the puzzle, I've never seen it respond to anyone the way it responds to you." Before Tom could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the academy. Red lights flashed in the hallways, and a computerized voice announced, "Warning! Quantum surge detected in the puzzle chamber. All students please evacuate immediately." The puzzle's surface had become more active than ever before. Its colors shifted faster, and the whispers grew louder. Instead of moving away, Tom leaned closer. "Young human, we should leave," Professor Gray said, but their voice held more curiosity than fear. "Wait," Tom said. "Look at this pattern. It's like when you turn the pages of a book really fast, and the pictures seem to move." The crystalline student and their friends had rushed back to the chamber entrance, drawn by the commotion. Behind them, a crowd of other students and teachers gathered, watching in amazement as the puzzle's surface erupted in a dazzling display of light and color. Tom stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on the shifting patterns. "It's not random at all. It's like those magic eye pictures my dad loves. You know, the ones where you have to look at them just right to see the hidden image." A wall-mounted scanner began beeping frantically. One of the senior professors, a being made entirely of floating geometric shapes, pushed through the crowd. "Impossible. The puzzle is generating quantum patterns that our instruments can't even measure. How is it doing this?" But Tom wasn't listening to the scientists and their instruments. He was watching the puzzle with the same attention he gave to finding shapes in clouds or spotting hidden objects in puzzle pictures. And slowly, something began to make sense. "It's playing hide and seek," he whispered. The crowd fell silent. Even the alarms seemed to quiet down. "What did you say?" Professor Gray asked. Tom pointed at the swirling patterns. "See how it shows you something for just a second, then hides it again. It's like when you play hide and seek, and someone giggles to give you a hint about where they're hiding. The puzzle isn't trying to be difficult. It's trying to play." The crystalline student scoffed. "That's ridiculous. This is an ancient artifact of immense power, not some Earth child's toy." But Professor Gray moved closer, their glowing eyes studying the patterns with new interest. Perhaps that's exactly why no one has been able to solve it. We've all been trying to force it to make sense, instead of letting it show us how it wants to be understood." Tom sat back down on the floor, ignoring the crowd of scholars arguing behind him. He watched the puzzle's shifting surface the way he would watch a playful kitten or a dancing butterfly. And as he did, more patterns began to emerge. "The lights make different shapes when I think about different things," he said, half to himself and half to Professor Gray. "When I think about Earth's ocean, they move like waves. When I think about birds, they spiral like they're flying. It's not trying to tell us something, it's trying to learn from us." The senior professor's geometric shapes spun in agitation. "Preposterous. We've applied the most advanced pattern recognition algorithms in the galaxy to this puzzle. Are you suggesting that simply playing with it is the key?" "Not playing with it," Professor Gray corrected. "Playing with him. The puzzle isn't just generating patterns, it's trying to communicate. And for some reason, it seems most interested in communicating with Tom." The crowd of students and teachers grew larger as word spread through the academy. Some scoffed at the idea that a human child could understand something their civilizations had studied for thousands of years. Others watched with growing interest as the puzzle continued to respond to Tom's presence. "Tomorrow," Professor Gray announced, "we will begin documenting these interactions properly. The Academy Board will want to understand exactly what's happening here." As the crowd slowly dispersed and the alarms finally stopped, Tom remained seated on the floor, watching the puzzle's dance of light and color. He remembered something his grandmother used to say. Sometimes the hardest part of finding something is remembering to look for it in the first place. The puzzle's whispers had changed tone again. Now they sounded almost like laughter, not the mocking kind that some students directed at him, but the happy sound of someone who had finally found a friend who understood them. "See you tomorrow," Tom said softly as he stood to leave. The puzzle's lights dimmed slightly, as if saying goodbye. That night, as Tom lay in bed, he thought about all the advanced aliens at the academy. They were smarter than him, knew more than him, and had technology he could barely understand. But maybe, just maybe, they had forgotten something important. Sometimes the best way to understand something isn't to study it, but to simply spend time with it and let it show you what it wants you to see. He fell asleep wondering what new patterns the puzzle would show him tomorrow, and for the first time since arriving at the academy, he felt like he had found exactly where he belonged. Word spread quickly through the Galactic Hub about the human child who could communicate with the eternal puzzle. Every day, more observers crowded the puzzle chamber, their instruments beeping and whirring as they tried to understand what was happening. But the more they watched, the more confused they became. Tom sat in his usual spot on the floor, ignoring the muttering crowd behind him. The puzzle's lights danced in front of him, forming patterns that reminded him of falling leaves in autumn. When he smiled at the memory, the lights changed to swirl like wind through trees. "Amazing," Professor Gray said, making notes on their floating datapad. "The quantum patterns seem to be responding to your memories. Can you describe what you're thinking about?" "I'm remembering the park near my old house on Earth," Tom explained. "In fall, all the leaves would change color and fall from the trees. My friends and I would jump in the big piles of leaves." The puzzle's surface rippled, and suddenly the patterns looked exactly like leaves scattering in the wind. Several of the watching scientists gasped. "Impossible," said one of them, a floating cloud of purple gas. "The puzzle is generating perfect fractal patterns matching Earth's deciduous foliage patterns. How could it know what Earth trees look like?" Tom shrugged. "I think it's reading the pictures in my mind. Like when you tell someone about a dream, and they can see it in their imagination." Professor Gray's trunk curled with excitement. The puzzle isn't just responding to Tom's emotions anymore. It's accessing and displaying his memories in a visual format. This is unprecedented. The crowd of observers grew more excited, their instruments beeping faster. But as they pressed closer, the puzzle's patterns became less clear, more chaotic. Tom noticed this happening more and more lately. The puzzle seemed to get confused when too many people were watching. "Everyone, please step back," Professor Gray announced. "We need to maintain optimal observation conditions." As the crowd reluctantly moved away, Tom noticed something new in the puzzle's patterns. Behind the swirling leaves, there was another layer of movement, like a story hiding behind another story. "Professor," he said quietly, "I think it's trying to tell me something." The professor moved closer, their four eyes focusing intently on the puzzle. "What do you mean?" "Well, you know how in some books there are pictures hidden inside other pictures, like those paintings where you can see a face one way, but when you look at it differently, it's a vase." "Ah, you mean optical illusions, the primitive but interesting form of visual art." Tom nodded. "The puzzle is doing something like that. When I look at these patterns, I can see my memories on the surface, but there's something else underneath, something older." The puzzle's lights shifted again, and this time Tom saw patterns that reminded him of ancient cave paintings he learned about in school. Stick figures dancing around fires, hunting animals, telling stories through simple drawings. "It's showing me how to read it," Tom said, his eyes wide with understanding. The puzzle hadn't been waiting for someone smart enough to solve it. It had been waiting for someone patient enough to listen to its story. News of Tom's breakthrough with the eternal puzzle spread beyond the academy to the entire galactic hub. Soon, delegations from different alien worlds began arriving, all wanting to see the human child who could communicate with the ancient artifact. The quiet puzzle chamber became crowded with important visitors, their voices echoing off the walls as they argued about what should be done. The puzzle clearly responds to the human child's primitive mental patterns, said an ambassador whose body was made of shifting metal plates. We should scan his brain and create an AI that can replicate these patterns. No, no, argued another, their 6 eyes blinking rapidly. We should move the puzzle to a more secure facility where proper research can be conducted. The academy is too public. Tom tried to ignore them as he sat in his usual spot, but the puzzle's patterns had become erratic. Instead of the clear, story-like images he'd seen before, the lights jumped and flickered nervously. The puzzle doesn't like all this attention, he told Professor Gray, who stood protectively nearby. It's like it's getting stage fright. Before the professor could respond, a group of official-looking aliens in formal robes swept into the chamber. The Academy's head administrator, a tall being with rainbow-colored scales, led them straight to Tom. Young human, the administrator said, their voice formal and cold, the Galactic Council has taken an interest in your interactions with the artifact. They have decided that access to the puzzle must be restricted to qualified researchers only. Tom felt his heart sink. But I've been making progress. The puzzle is trying to tell us something important. Precisely why we cannot leave such a vital discovery in the hands of a child, said one of the robed council members. This is too important for games and stories. Professor Gray stepped forward, their trunk raised in protest. With all due respect, it's exactly that approach, treating the puzzle like a problem to be solved rather than a story to be understood, that has kept us from progress for thousands of years. The council members began arguing among themselves, their voices growing louder. The puzzle's surface flickered more frantically, its patterns becoming almost chaotic. Stop, Tom shouted, jumping to his feet. You're scaring it. Everyone in the chamber fell silent, staring at him. Even the council members looked surprised at his outburst. Scaring it? The administrator asked, their scales shifting from rainbow colors to a doubtful gray. It's a machine, a puzzle, an artifact. It cannot feel fear. Tom shook his head. That's where everyone keeps going wrong. The puzzle isn't just a machine. It's alive, in its own way. And right now, all this fighting is making it harder for it to communicate. As if to prove his point, the puzzle's surface had become a swirling mess of conflicting patterns, like a television with bad reception. A new voice spoke up from the back of the chamber. Perhaps we should listen to the boy. The crowd parted to reveal an elderly human woman making her way forward. Tom's face lit up with recognition. It was his grandmother, who must have traveled all the way from Earth to the hub. Gran, he called out, running to hug her. What are you doing here? She smiled, her wrinkled face warm and kind. Your parents called me, told me what was happening. They thought you might need someone in your corner. She turned to address the council members. On Earth, we have a saying. Sometimes the wisest eyes are the youngest ones. The administrator's scales flickered uncertainly. And you are qualified to speak on this matter because I spent 40 years teaching young children. Tom's grandmother replied calmly. And I learned that children often see things more clearly than adults, precisely because they don't try to complicate everything. She walked with Tom back to his spot near the puzzle. As they approached, the chaotic patterns began to calm down, returning to the more organized displays Tom was used to seeing. See, Tom's grandmother said to the watching crowd. The puzzle knows who its friend is. You can't force understanding. You have to let it come naturally. Professor Gray moved to stand beside them. She's right. Every time we've tried to force our way to a solution, the puzzle has become more incomprehensible. Only when Tom approached it with openness and friendship did it begin to share its secrets. The council members huddled together, speaking in whispers. The administrator's scales shifted through various colors as they discussed the situation. Finally, the administrator turned back to face Tom. The council will need time to debate this matter fully. Until then, You are forbidden from any unsupervised contact with the puzzle. Guards will be posted, and all interactions must be monitored and recorded. Tom felt tears welling up in his eyes. But that's not fair. The puzzle trusts me. If you try to control everything, it won't share its story. His grandmother put a gentle hand on his shoulder. Sometimes, Tom, the hardest part of being right is waiting for others to understand what you already know. The puzzle's surface suddenly blazed with light, brighter than Tom had ever seen it. The patterns began forming faster and faster, showing images of stars and planets and strange beings, all connected by lines of light. "Look," Professor Gray exclaimed. "It's trying to tell us something." But the council members were already turning away, discussing security measures and research protocols. Only Tom, his grandmother, and Professor Gray watched as the puzzle's patterns formed one clear image, a small figure reaching out to touch a light that grew brighter and brighter. "It's not giving up," Tom whispered to his grandmother. "And neither am I." She squeezed his shoulder. "Of course not, dear. The best stories are the ones that take time to tell properly." As guards began to usher everyone out of the chamber, Tom looked back at the puzzle one last time. Its surface had dimmed, but he could still see patterns moving slowly across it, like waves on a quiet sea. "I'll find a way," he promised softly. "I'll help them understand." The puzzle's lights pulsed once, gently, like a heartbeat. Tom knew that no matter what the council decided, no matter how many guards they posted or rules they made, the puzzle would wait for him. After all, it had waited 10,000 years to find someone who would listen to its story. It could wait a little longer. For 3 days, Tom wasn't allowed to visit the puzzle chamber. He went to his classes at the academy, but his heart wasn't in it. Every time he passed the hallway leading to the chamber, the guards would watch him carefully. The puzzle's soft whispers seemed to call to him, even from a distance. On the morning of the 4th day, something strange happened. The puzzle's glow, usually contained within the chamber, began to spread through the academy's halls. The guards reported that the artifact was becoming more active than ever before, its patterns spinning faster and faster. The Galactic Council called an emergency meeting. Tom's parents, as Earth's representatives, were invited to attend. His grandmother insisted on coming too, and to everyone's surprise, she brought Tom with her. The council chamber was enormous, with seats rising up like a giant bowl. Beings from hundreds of different worlds filled the seats, all talking at once about the puzzle's unusual behavior. Tom sat between his parents and grandmother, feeling very small among all these important people. "Order," called the head administrator, their scales flashing bright colors for attention. "We are here to discuss the artifact's recent activity. Our best scientists report that its energy levels are reaching dangerous heights." Professor Gray, who had been invited to speak, stepped forward. "The puzzle's behavior changed exactly when we restricted the human child's access to it. I believe there's a connection." One of the metal-plated council members stood up. "Are you suggesting that this primitive artifact is throwing a tantrum because it misses the human child?" "That's exactly what it's doing," Tom's grandmother said clearly, her voice carrying through the chamber. "Any teacher could tell you that's how a student acts when you stop them from learning in the way that works best for them." The chamber erupted in argument. Some council members laughed at the idea, while others demanded more research. But their debate was interrupted by a sudden flash of light. The puzzle's glow had reached the council chamber. Patterns of light danced across the walls, forming images that Tom recognized from his sessions with the puzzle. But now, instead of showing them just to him, the puzzle was sharing its story with everyone. The images showed the history of the galaxy, not just the facts and figures that the Academy taught, but the small, important moments that made up real history. There were beings of pure energy playing among newborn stars, ancient civilizations learning to care for their worlds, species reaching out to each other across the gulf of space. "It's beautiful," someone whispered, and the chamber grew quiet as more images appeared. The puzzle showed wars and peace, growth and destruction, wisdom gained and wisdom lost. But through it all, there was a pattern that Tom recognized. The same pattern he'd seen in the way the puzzle first spoke to him. "Don't you see?" he said, standing up. "The puzzle isn't just showing us history. It's showing us how to learn from it." Professor Gray's trunk curled in excitement. "Of course, the artifact isn't a test or a weapon or a library. It's a teacher." The images changed again, showing scenes from Tom's own interactions with the puzzle. Everyone could see how it had adjusted its patterns to match his way of thinking, how it had built trust through play and curiosity. "The ancient beings who created the puzzle," Tom continued, his voice growing stronger, "they didn't want to just give us all their knowledge. They wanted to find someone who would understand why the knowledge was important." His grandmother smiled proudly. "And they knew that sometimes the best students are the ones who haven't forgotten how to wonder." The head administrator's scales had turned a deep blue color of thought. But why create such an elaborate device? Why not simply record their knowledge in a more straightforward way? The puzzle answered by showing new images, scenes of different civilizations discovering the puzzle over thousands of years. Some tried to force it open, others tried to decode it mathematically, and many simply gave up. But in each case, the puzzle waited patiently for someone who would approach it with the right mindset. Because, Tom explained, they knew that the most important lessons are the ones you learn for yourself. Like how my teachers don't just give us answers. They help us figure things out on our own. The puzzle's light grew brighter, and suddenly the chamber was filled with images of children from thousands of different species. Each one was shown learning, playing, discovering, their eyes filled with the same wonder that Tom felt when he first saw the puzzle. The creators of the puzzle weren't looking for the smartest beings in the galaxy, Professor Gray said softly. They were looking for the wisest ones, those who still knew how to learn with their hearts as well as their minds. The metal-plated council member spoke again, but this time their voice was gentle, and they knew that such wisdom often comes in unexpected packages. The puzzle's patterns began to form one final image, a gathering of beings made of light, watching over countless worlds and species. Their forms shifted and changed, but their message was clear. They had faith that eventually someone would understand. "They're still out there," Tom whispered. "The puzzle isn't just their message. It's their way of finding others who see the universe like they do." The head administrator stood up, their scales now glowing with all the colors of the rainbow. "I believe we owe the human child an apology. In our rush to understand the puzzle, we forgot the most important lesson it was trying to teach us." "What's that?" asked one of the council members. "That true wisdom comes not from having all the answers, but from being willing to learn from anyone, even a child." The puzzle's light began to fade, returning to its normal glow in the chamber. But now everyone understood that its light had always been meant to guide, not to blind, to teach, not to test. As the council meeting ended, decisions were made quickly. The guards were removed from the puzzle chamber. Tom was given permission to continue his sessions with the puzzle, with Professor Gray and his grandmother as guides. And most importantly, the Academy began a new program, inviting young students from all species to spend time with the puzzle, learning its stories in their own ways. That evening, as Tom sat in his usual spot in the puzzle chamber, the pattern seemed more peaceful than ever before. His grandmother sat nearby, knitting quietly, while Professor Gray made gentle notes about the puzzle's behavior. "You know what's funny?" Tom said, watching the lights dance. "Everyone thought the puzzle was the galaxy's hardest problem to solve. But it wasn't a problem at all. It was just waiting for someone to listen to its story." The puzzle's surface rippled with what looked like laughter, and Tom smiled. Sometimes the biggest discoveries in the universe aren't made by the smartest people with the most advanced technology. Sometimes they're made by those who remember that the best way to learn something new is to approach it with an open heart and a willingness to wonder.